Hello everyone, welcome to Nilog IAS Current Affair Analysis for 25th June 2020, and these are the articles we'll be dealing today. The first article for the day is taken from the Hindu and it is titled The US Trail at The Hague. So the news is in the context of the Hague based International Criminal Court that began an investigation into alleged war crimes in Afghanistan. So before proceeding further, let me explain a brief background in which the International Criminal Court was formed. To understand the basics of this, we have to go back to a genocide called the Rwandan genocide in 1994. So what is this Rwandan genocide? So in Rwanda, which is in Africa, there was a war in which mass slaughter of Tutsi, Twa and moderate Hutu tribes. So this Rwandan genocide was so brutal and so massive that it shocked the world entirely, but no country actually intervened to forcefully stop these killings. Most of the victims were killed in their own villages or towns, and many by their neighbors and fellow villagers only. The documented killings were so brutal. Sometimes they were just murdered by machetes and just by mob killing. So there was an estimated 5 lakhs to 10 lakhs Rwandans who were killed. That is about 70% of the country's Tutsi population was wiped out. So it is in this context of the international crime that this International Criminal Court came into existence, because whatever mechanism that the world tried to use to address this Rwandan genocide, it was of no avail. And it is in this background that the International Criminal Court was created. So it was set up after all the ad hoc tribunals that tried to deal with this Rwandan genocide proved to be ineffective, and this came out as a criminal court. So this International Criminal Court is based on the principle of complementarity. So this was not created to bypass the authority of national courts. We have to remember this point. However, when a state's legal system collapses, or when a government is itself the perpetrator of certain heinous crimes against human rights, ICC can definitely extend its jurisdiction and ensure that justice prevails. ICC is in this way a court of last resort. But for this to happen, you have to be a signatory of what is called the Rome Statute. So naturally, there will be a sense of fear and reluctance from governments for accepting this. USA has opposed the International Criminal Court creation for the fear that it will be used politically against US nationals. So ICC ensures that those who commit serious human rights violations are held accountable, and justice helps promise lasting peace, enables victims to rebuild their lives, and also sends out a strong message that those who carry out this kind of international crimes will not go unpunished. Another brief point before we proceed further with respect to India. Is India a party to this Rome Statute? No. India is not a party to this International Criminal Court. India raised major objections to the Rome Statute, and these are: ICC is subordinate to UNSC. Permanent members are vested with unbridled powers. So this is the first objection raised by India with respect to ICC. The second one is terrorism and nuclear weapons usage is not in the purview of ICC. One major point that you have to remember here is there is a difference between International Court of Justice, which is also at Hague, but it is a UN body and it only involves UN members, not individual crimes. That is the point we have to remember. It is the government that is held accountable in this case, but in the case of ICC, it can also be individuals. That is the basic difference between ICJ, a UN body, and ICC, which is an intergovernmental body that is formed on the basis of a treaty called Rome Statute. India and USA are not a part of this. This is the important part for preliminary level examination. So recently, as we have already spoken about it, International Criminal Court has decided to impose certain investigations upon US nationals. So the International Criminal Court says that United Nations President Donald Trump's decision to impose sanctions on court employees investigating alleged war crimes in Afghanistan is not only an attack on the court and the system of international criminal justice, but also on the interests of the victims of atrocities. So this comment comes in the backdrop when the President of the United States, Trump, has signed an executive order on Thursday to block all kinds of financial assets of court employees and bar them and their immediate relatives from entering into United States. So the administration of White House accused the court, which the US has never recognized, of infringing on its sovereignty. Now one might get a doubt that since USA is not a part of the Rome Statute, how is it right for the International Criminal Court to carry out an investigation on allegations? So it is here that we have to remember that the 1998 Rome Statute provides for the prosecution of crimes committed in the territory of any one of the state parties. So it is not necessary that USA is a part of Rome Statute. We have to remember this point. Even though it is not a part of Rome Statute, USA can actually perpetuate any kind of crime in one of the countries, that is one of the 123 countries which have accepted this Rome Statute. So if USA commits crimes in one of these countries, then International Criminal Court can start investigations on the alleged crimes and prosecute action. So this is the basis for ICC's actions. So this news is very important from preliminary level point of view, and also if we have to place this news item in the larger picture of international relations, we can put it under the retreat of multilateralism. So by and large, after the entry of Donald Trump into the international politics scene, USA has been withdrawing from a lot of multilateral organizations. So this can be looked at as a part of the larger trend and talks about a foreign policy that is inward looking. So that is the gist of this article. The second article for the day is taken from the Hindu and it is titled "The Perils of Follow the Leader Syndrome." So this is about the kind of institutions that India should aspire for, not just India, any democracy should aspire for, and how institutions cannot be dictated by leaders. Sure, leadership will definitely have its influence on systems, but it should not be in such a way that the entire system should be so ad hoc that it varies from one kind of a persona to another person as and when they arrive into the political scene. So this talks about how we have to build our institutions. That is the basis of this article. So in the present crisis, what is happening is, according to the author, our economic disruption is being mismanaged and a lot of livelihoods are at stake. So it is the time for our collective inner conscience to come up and question the governments if we believe that it is mismanaging our resources. So it is in this context the author quotes a statement by John Stuart Mill. So this was quoted by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar during our constitutional debates as well. So it says that the gist is that we have to ensure that our liberties are not sacrificed and are not put at the feet of great men, even if they are greatest of the noblest of the men. What Dr. B.R. Ambedkar advocated during that time in the constitutional debates is that we should never ever give up on our civil liberties. So it is in this context that John Stuart Mill was quoted, and it is all the more important in today's world. So the author quotes an example of the style of leadership that is prevalent in our country's politics. He believes that it is modeled around a single persona, or he calls it hero worship. So this hero worship can be a very useful way in attaining salvation in religion. So this is what the Bhakti movement also advocated, devotion to a single persona. But in politics, according to the author, it is a sure shot way of ensuring that there is degeneration in our ethos, and eventually it will lead to dictatorship. So the context of this entire rhetoric is to give insight into how we are going about our COVID management. Right now we don't have a national plan to combat the disease. We are using the Disaster Management Act 2005, which expressly defines disaster as a catastrophe, mishap, calamity or grave occurrence in any area. So we can say that the definition does not cover the scope of a pandemic or does not have any provisions to technically deal with a issue like this. However, the act is more or less said to be very comprehensive in talking about the structure and management of a emergency. So the act is comprehensive and provides for inter alia the constitution of a national authority, a national executive committee and a advisory committee of experts in the field to make a recommendation for a national plan. That has not happened till now. So the provisions of the Disaster Management Act 2005 were implemented only after the Supreme Court intervened in the Swaraj Abhiyan versus Union of India and others case. So in 2016, the court directed that the act must be implemented, and in particular there should be a National Disaster Response Fund, that is NDRF. So this is a fund which enforces that a central government should put some money into this account. At the same time, in 2016, the government came up with a National Disaster Management Plan. However, this plan is still not in place in effective implementation, and without it, the fight against COVID is very ad hoc and has resulted in thousands of government's orders which are very confusing to say the least. Even the NDRF is inactive, and if we take for instance on April 3rd, 2020, the government of India agreed to contribute its share to the NDRF, but curiously it said that keeping in mind the need for a dedicated national fund with a primary objective of dealing with any kind of emergency or distress, especially like that of COVID, the Prime Minister created PM CARES Fund. So instead of putting the money in NDRF, the Prime Minister created PM CARES Fund. So this is a direct violation of the section 46 of the Disaster Management Act. Now another problem with this PM CARES Fund is the fact that Comptroller and Auditor General cannot audit this fund. Curiously, the government has given some money to NDRF in May when there was a locust attack. So the author says that the government prioritized locust attack over fighting coronavirus. So considering all these cases, we have to ensure that our parliament is back and running, and judiciary should take up sumo to interventions like in the case of migrants crisis and investigate into this matter. Why is a national disaster management plan for handling COVID not in place yet? Why is Parliament not taken into confidence? These are the questions pertaining to the action plan with respect to COVID. That is the gist of this article.